Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
James Cleverly is a minister for Brexit and, of course, the Member of Parliament for Braintree. He's also been I think it's fair to say, a very outspoken supporter of Boris Johnson, and therefore, presumably, James, you're rubbing your hands with glee this morning at the prospect of a Johnson premiership and a promotion for Cleverly.
Well, thank you. Good morning. I'm hoping that he does get the leadership of the party, and as you say, by extension, becomes prime minister. Because I've worked with him in London, and you yourself, James, are evidence of the fact that he can reach out to people that perhaps don't normally regard themselves as Conservative voters. I think that's really important. And also, through his time as Mayor of London, demonstrated, and I know you won't agree with all of this, but demonstrated that he can run an effective liberal right-of-centre administration and do so well. And that's why I'm supporting him.
Why do you think it went so badly at the Foreign Office?
Well, there were, it was a mixed ticket at the Foreign Office, but let's remember...
What do you think his positive achievements were?
Well, I think actually getting a global consensus to eject unregistered Russian intelligence agents around the world, that was a huge diplomatic coup. That's a really, really important time in the aftermath of the Salisbury attack. The message needed to go out that the international rules-based order was robust.
I won't dwell on this, but you're being a little bit cheeky claiming Boris Johnson was responsible for that.
Well, so hang on. So when he was Foreign Secretary, either he is or isn't responsible for UK foreign policy. That was a UK foreign policy win at a really, really important time. If you're saying... But it was and I know that the Prime Minister was front and centre, but as I said, let's not dwell on that. It's his mayoralty, not his tenure. Let's gloss over something really important.
No, we can stay on it if you want. Remind me what he said. What was the intervention, do you think, that was most crucial in convincing...
Well, the point is, it was about...
And hang on, no, because I'd like to ask you a second question. If we are going to dwell on this, because of course it was only a couple of weeks later that Donald Trump said he regretted chucking out the American diplomats. So where was Boris Johnson during that process?
Well, look, I'm not here to defend or otherwise the words of President Trump.
Well, hang on, it's our foreign policy that he was criticising, and you've just expressed Boris Johnson's responsibility for that foreign policy in a positive light. I suggested that we could move on. You didn't want to. So how come Boris Johnson failed to convince our closest ally that the policy you've just praised was a good idea?
That's the important thing. What President Trump puts on media or tweets, whatever, is not the important point. The important point is
what he says in public is important, James Cleverly, and what he said in public was that he wished he hadn't expelled Russian diplomats.
But the point is, they were expelled, James, and that prevents them doing the job.
Okay, so as I said, let's not dwell on this. Let's move on instead to the positives that you can see on the horizon. What do you think will be his first priority?
Well, the first priority is what he said his first priority will be, which is making sure that we deliver on the mandate given to all of us in the referendum, which is to leave the European Union, do so in good order, and then get on with the really important other elements of government, which is about making sure our public services are well funded, making sure education is well funded, we get police officers on the streets, the kind of things that actually people talk to me far more regularly about than Brexit.
And why do you think the government you're currently part of couldn't do those things?
No, the government is doing those things. We need to do more. So there's been a record level of investment in the NHS, for example. We need to make sure that money gets to the front line and is effectively used. There's been increases in police funding over the last couple of years.
So what's he going to do that's new, do you think? What are going to be the things we can look forward to that aren't already happening?
Well, I think the biggest one is delivering Brexit. I mean, and it's
which he voted for and against the withdrawal agreement. Which way is he leaning at the moment? Do we know?
Well, the most recent time he voted in favour of the withdrawal agreement. That said, the House of Commons rejected it. So something has got to change. And
what?
Yeah, that is what is going to have to be open to negotiation.
With whom?
with the with the EU, with the heads of state and heads of government around the European Union, to try and get something which convinces the UK Parliament that this is a deal worth supporting and we can get through the House. But if that can't happen, we have still got to deliver on the commitment that was made by both sides of the referendum campaign in 2016, which is to leave the European Union.
Is there any grounds for, I don't know how privy you are to sort of this level of diplomacy, is there any grounds for believing that the heads of the 27 European states hold a position that's at odds with their frequently stated public position?
Well, in a negotiation, people move positions. That's what negotiations are about. And the EU...
Well, they haven't moved since the withdrawal agreement was agreed, have they?
No, but that doesn't mean to say.
And they've said repeatedly that they won't. Is there any grounds for optimism that they're fibbing?
Well, at the start of this process, they said repeatedly there were no bespoke deals, but the withdrawal agreement was a bespoke deal. They said repeatedly that you can't separate the four freedoms, yet the withdrawal agreement separated the four freedoms. So things that they have in the past... It
separates the four freedoms during a transition period. It doesn't separate the four freedoms as a future relationship. You know this, James.
Yeah, I know, but the point is, they were saying absolutely no
transition is not a word I need to explain the meaning of to you.
No, but the point is, James, they said there was never going to be a separation of four freedoms. They have broken that principle.
In the future relationship.
The point I'm making, you can haggle around details if you want, but the point I'm saying...
It's not haggling around details, it's establishing facts, James.
They said absolutely that something could never happen, and then they put forward an agreement which did that very thing. So the point I'm making, the broader point I'm making, James, is that the fact that at some point in the negotiation, one of the negotiating parties says something cannot happen, that doesn't necessarily mean that they won't at some point, given the right incentives, move. And this is what negotiations are all about. This is how negotiations work. And what we are, I think, most of us hoping for is that the EU recognise the reality that the current structure didn't get through the House of Commons despite numerous attempts, and that they are able to move in a meaningful way that gives us a chance of getting it through the House. Because ultimately, as a passionate, long-standing Brexiteer, I would much prefer to leave with an agreement. And I also think the EU recognise that it's much better for the UK to leave with an agreement as well.
Different from the agreement that they've already agreed?
Well, as I say, negotiations are about changing positions, and what I really hope is through negotiations through the summer, that that's what happens.
And here's the nub, isn't it, or the rub? Johnson himself has said that the withdrawal agreement was demonstrably inferior to remaining in the European Union, and yet he voted for it. You are, I understand why, and I think plausibly claiming that there is a mandate for leaving both with a withdrawal agreement and without a withdrawal agreement. Most of the polling suggested that the prospect of leaving with no deal had occurred to, a vanishingly small minority of people who voted to leave. But in your defence, a lot of people are now retrospectively claiming that that's what they wanted all along. It's a fairly blurred mandate, isn't it?
No, it's an absolutely clear mandate. The mandate was unambiguous, and that was to leave the European Union.
And yet the literature stated we will be leaving with a deal.
But the ballot paper had two options: leave or remain. And the majority of people that voted to leave, and that therefore
having been promised that they'd be leaving with a deal.
Yeah, but also the Remain side made a whole load of promises.
Not talking about them. We're talking about the mandate, not the people who haven't got a mandate. They were promised. They promised that we'd leave with a deal.
No, the mandate is clear that we leave. The ballot paper said leave or remain. People ticked leave. The ballot paper didn't carry any other...
Do you think that was a mistake in retrospect, eh?
No, because the question in a referendum, just like an election, needs to be clear, and the question was clear. Do you want to leave or do you want to remain? And people voted to leave, so that's what we're going to do. And it's not complicated.
No, it isn't complicated. Just can you think of one example from that febrile period of politics in the run-up to the 2016 referendum when anybody on your side suggested that leaving with a no deal was possible? Just one example?
But, I mean, James, you can retrospectively...
It's a simple question, James.
Concerns to it. But the point I'm saying is the question on the ballot paper was clear and unambiguous.
I will ask you again.
Go on.
Can you think of one example from the entire Leave campaign, whether it was the Farage-flavoured or the Boris Johnson and Michael Gove-flavoured campaigns, that suggested in good faith that leaving with no deal was a possibility?
Well, the point is that...
The question is, can you?
The deal or otherwise wasn't discussed.
Can you, though?
The short answer is no.
OK.
But the point is...
That's quite the mandate you've got there.
The question... Wait. The question was clear and unambiguous. Do you want to leave or remain? Remain didn't have any explanation. And the fact that the EU is changing means that had we remained, we would have, had we voted to remain, we would have had a whole load of people saying, oh, hang on a second.
Possibly, but these are hypotheticals.
Let me say,
of course I will. I just want to squeeze in one more question.
You're asking hypotheticals. You're asking hypotheticals.
No, I'm asking for a factual recall of what people said in the run-up to 2016. That's not hypothetical. I'm asking you to provide us with facts. But it's all right, you've said you can't, so carry on.
So the point I'm saying is the EU is changing. Von der Leyen has put forward the idea that nation-state vetoes on tax policy should be scrapped. These are changes that the EU is making. The EU is evolving.
One person has called for it. There's plenty of people in the EU that have objected to it and will vote to reject it, as you also well know. But we're short of time. Final question. What do you think of Jeremy Hunt's calls for a European Navy?
I don't agree with having a parallel structure to NATO. NATO is our strongest and best defence relationship. It's underscored peace for decades. I think that should be where our commitment is.
So when Mike Pompeo says that they're not going to help British ships in the Gulf, where should the British Foreign Minister, Foreign Secretary turn for assistance?
Well, so I don't know the reference that you made. So it's difficult for me to comment on what Mike Pompeo said because I've not seen that. So I'm not going to comment on a quote that I haven't seen. But the point is, ultimately, NATO is a right defence mechanism. European nation states are members of NATO, and therefore, if we're going to rely on our allies, NATO is the best way of doing it. I think we should rely on our allies. That's how alliances work. I think NATO is the best mechanism for doing that.